Okay, this video is going to kind of walk us through the organic chemistry unit, which is chapter 9. First off, organic chemistry is the study of carbon, and about 95% of the compounds contain carbon. So the majority of compounds that we would come across in our day-to-day living would be organic carbons or organic compounds. So as I said before, that's the study of carbon. There are different kinds of carbon arrangements that we look at. The simplest ones are called hydrocarbons, and that just means they have all hydrogens and carbons. If we had something like this, that would be a hydrocarbon because it only has carbons and hydrogens. And if you'll notice, carbon always is going to have 4 bonds. It could have single bonds, it could have double bonds, or it could have triple bonds, but carbon is always going to have 4. Now, if they are all single bonds, then it's what we call an alkane. And if it's an alkane and it's all single bonds, we refer to that as being a saturated hydrocarbon. And the simplest one would be this one over here with only 1 carbon. And that is methane. And the word meth, that prefix, means 1 carbon. Now when we look at alkanes, in order to name them, it's fairly simple and straightforward. If we look at the chart that's over here, this tells us how many carbon atoms there are. And if there's 1 carbon atom, like in the last one where I had CH4, that's why it's called methane. And we always have the number of carbons that we start with, and then the ending for an alkane, as long as it's all got single bonds, that's an alkane, we call the ending ane. So we could have methane, ethane, propane, butane, pentane, for example. So let's say that I had 6 carbons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then there would be hydrogens all around here. Wherever I have a line, there'd be a hydrogen. So since it has 6 carbons, we would call this hexane. So that's the way that we're going to name our simple alkanes. Now a lot of times we look at what's called a condensed structural formula, and those are used to kind of tell us what the structure is, but it kind of squishes it up. So this particular one, if we wanted to write it all out, and then there's hydrogens all over here wherever I have these lines. I would have a C with 3 H's, a C with 2 H's, and a C with 3 H's. So they've kind of squished up this structure, and that's why it's called a condensed structural. And this one, since it has 1, 2, 3 carbons, we would call that propane. So since there's 3, it's prop. Since they're all single bonds, we're going to call it ane, so propane. Now, homologous series are a series of alkanes that only differ by 1 CH2 group. And they have pretty predictable behaviors as far as their properties go. So here, this is methane, and notice if I have 2 carbons, we're going to call it ethane. And then here we have propane, 4 carbons is butane. You can see I just keep adding on 1 more CH2 group. And the more carbons that you have, the more isomers that are possible. So an isomer is a compound that has the same number of carbons and hydrogens, so the same number of each atom, but they have different arrangements. So this one, this is all in a line, so this is called a straight chain alkane. And it's butane because 1, 2, 3, 4 carbons, so 4 means but, and I put ane on the end. This one has 3 carbons in a row and then 1 carbon that's branching off. So they call this a branched alkane, and this name would be isobutane. So it has a different name, and every single isomer would have a different name, even though they have the same formula. Now we can also find hydrocarbons that occur in circles. and these are called cyclic hydrocarbons. And this would be the smallest one that I could have, which would be 3 carbons. Other examples, we could have, here's the 3 that we had before. This one has 6. This one even has a double bond in it. But to name them, we always put the word cyclo in front, and then we name them the same way that we would name our alkanes. So since this has 3, that would be prop. So we call it cyclo, prop for 3, and then ane. Since this has 6 carbons, and it's in a circle, cyclo means circle, hex means 6, and then all single bonds, so hexane. And this is going to give us a clue as what's coming. This one has a double bond in it, so it's still circle, so cyclo for circle, hex for 6. Now I have this ene on the end, and this ene indicates that I have a double bond. So as far as alkenes go, an alkene means I contain a double bond somewhere in my structure. To name them, I name them the same exact way as I was naming the single bonds, except instead of the ending being ane, the ending is now ene. And sometimes you're going to see a number occur in there, and that number would tell us what the place of the double bond is. And this one, since it has 2 carbons means F, so I would call this ethene. And you can see ethylene is that simplest alkene. Now, if I have a triple bond, then it's called an alkyne. And the only difference here is instead of using an ane on the end like I do for alkanes, or an ene for the double bonds, I'm going to use a yne for an ine for a triple bond. Now in this case, I have 2 carbons again, so this would be eth, and then I call it ethyne. So you can see over here the formula is ethyne. This is also known as acetylene, but this is the smallest triple bonded atom that I could have. Now if I have an alkene, so double bonds or triple bonds, those are called unsaturated hydrocarbons. And the undersaturated hydrocarbons, they undergo addition reactions. So in this particular case, I have this double bond that's unsaturated, and here I have a hydrogen. I'm going to break this double bond, and that means in its place I could attach 2 more hydrogens. So that's why it's called addition, because I'm adding those hydrogens on. This would be an example of a triple bonded one, and this time I could break 2 of those double bonds, and that means I would be able to add a total of 4 H's, so 1, 2, 3, 4. And whenever they're all single bonds, I call those saturated. And this is very much like saturated and unsaturated fats when we think about our diets. Unsaturated fats are things that have double or triple bonds in those fat chains. And if they are saturated, that means that they have all of them filled up. There aren't any double or triple bonds.